Hi, I'm Erin Lundy.
And I'm Madeline Walden, and this is
Aquarium of the Podcific,
a podcast brought to you by Aquarium of the Pacific, Southern California's largest aquarium.
Join us as we learn alongside the experts in animal care, conservation, and more. Welcome back to Aquarium of the Podcific. I'm Erin Lundy, Conservation Coordinator for Mammals and Birds.
And I'm Madeline Walden, the aquarium's digital content and community manager. I was so caught up in your introduction that I got nervous.
You were focusing on it.
What are we going to talk about today?
Today we're talking about a very interesting plant, animal, structure, ? That was enough. But corals, which are one of the probably sort of less highlighted animals at the aquarium because people don't often know that they are, in fact, animals. And they are living beings, and they are structures that are very meticulously cared for by our aquarists, which I'm very excited to learn about.
Me too. They're so beautiful. If you visit the aquarium and you're able to see the exhibits with live coral, know that there's so much time and care that goes into them. And also some of them have been here since we opened in 1998. So a lot of our corals are charter animals, technically.
That's crazy to think about. Some of the corals that we have here are also corals that have been confiscated for one reason or another. And so because they are animals, they then need a home, and the aquarium is happy to provide a sort of refuge for those confiscated animals and allow them to really grow and develop here. I see our aquarists sometimes diving for hours, just kind of like picking out little things of sand from our coral and really cleaning them up. And it seems like the most tedious and meticulous process, but also so meditative to just be like underwater.
It's a Zen garden.
Yeah, it seems so fun. I'm very jealous. I have no idea how to take care of coral, but thankfully we're going to be talking to Jay Harvey today, who is a corals expert and not only has taken care of coral here at the aquarium, but has also taken care of coral internationally.
We're going to get into his work with the Sea Corps program and what that is exactly, so stay tuned for that. I'm excited about this one. It's going to be really, really educational.
Cool. Well, without further ado, let's get into it and learn a little bit about corals.
Hi, Jay. Thank you so much for being on the podcast today. We appreciate it.
Hi. Thank you for having me.
Welcome.
I'm excited.
So we are going to talk about corals, and specifically corals here at the aquarium, and then the Sea Corps project. So we'll ask what that is in a little bit. But tell us a little bit about you at the aquarium. What's your job here? What do you do? What do you take care of?
Yeah, so I am an aquarist here at the Aquarium of the Pacific. So that means I take care of fish and invertebrates, and I work in our tropical Pacific gallery. So I work with mainly warm water things that live in and around coral reefs or in the tropics of the Pacific Ocean. So I work with kind of a large array of species, seahorses, a lot of big fish, small fish, cuttlefish, shrimp fish,
red fish,
lots of
blue
cool
fish.
fish. Yeah, one fish, two fish, many fish. And then obviously I work a lot with corals. So if you have explored our tropical gallery, you may have noticed that pretty much all of our exhibits in that gallery have some form of coral in them. And so we kind of use that to kind of decorate our exhibits. It's kind of the focus of some exhibits. So it's a big part of our jobs, making corals happy here.
Are they all live corals?
Good question. So there are some exhibits, some of our bigger exhibits that have fake coral in them. So our big tropical reef exhibit has fake coral. And then there is one exhibit just through the tunnel that is also fake coral.
What's the advantage of using some of those artificial corals over real ones, or why might we do that?
Yeah, so corals themselves are very sensitive. They're very tricky to keep happy and alive. Yeah, I identify with them on a daily basis. So it can take a lot of work to keep them alive, and especially in a really big exhibit like Tropical Reef, it would take a lot of work. So it's just less work on our end to have fake corals in there. So.
Yeah, if you visit the aquarium and you explore our tropical Pacific gallery, you'll notice that a lot of the corals we have in there are really big, and some of them I think are even charter animals, right? Because corals are animals.
Yes, they are.
We'll get into that in a second.
A+.
So cool. Yay! And that's it.
And
Podcast
we're done.
over today.
And they're also food for some of the fish, right?
Yes. So we actually have a exhibit, that's the one I was mentioning, through the tunnel, that's called our Coral Predators exhibit. So most of the animals in there are species that will actually eat coral.
That's where Michael lives.
Yes, one of them being our
Keisha's favorite animal.
big parrotfish. His name
Thinking
is
of
Michael.
the Aquarist Michael for a second.
Common misconception. We
where Michael
call the
lives.
fish Michael
Yep.
and human Michael human Michael.
Human Michael, shout out to
Don't
human
get it
Michael.
twisted.
Exactly.
To all
It
humans
has
named
happened
Michael.
before. Yeah. But yeah, so we have parrotfish in there. Parrotfish like to eat coral. They have big, nice teeth that chomp through the coral skeletons, and they actually eat the skeleton. Their body can actually process it and break it down, and so they poop out sand. So in that exhibit, we are constantly sucking out fish poop.
Do you guys have
in the
like
form of
extra
sand.
sand in that exhibit? Like, does that's a weird
There's
question.
so much sand in there.
Constantly
But does
sand.
it like produce more sand?
Oh yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah, if you look, like if you're standing in front of the exhibit on the front left, that's where his poop sand accumulates.
He has a toilet area.
Literally.
Aw, he's responsible.
Yeah.
I love
I
that.
feel like I think we might have to do like an entire
is this
podcast
Michael?
episode. That's Michael.
Michael,
Right?
yes.
Poops in
Fish
one
Michael,
corner?
again, not human Michael. The distinction
yeah,
is very
that's
important.
Sorry, all human Michaels. Fish Michael has a litter box corner
Yes.
that's all sand. That's
Aw.
amazing.
That's amazing. I think we will do a podcast episode all about coral predators specifically because it's such
Yeah.
a
I thought you were
interesting
gonna say Fish Michael.
about Fish Michael
I mean, I'll be in it.
and
Yeah,
human
spotlight.
Michael.
I heard a rumor when I was living in Hawaii that all of the beautiful white sandy beaches in Hawaii are a result of parrotfish poop.
Yup.
Yup. So
Yup.
if you are ever on a beautiful tropical vacation in Hawaii, just know that you are enjoying a lot of parrotfish poop over
Yeah.
the years. But it is beautiful, and it makes for those beautiful white sandy beaches because that is all those coral skeletons that have been processed
Right,
through.
exactly. Yeah, and I don't remember the exact number, but there's a crazy stat about how much sand a single parrotfish produces a year. It's wild.
I think we should measure Michael's poops and get an
That
idea
would
of
actually
it.
be interesting.
That's a good study. We should
And then
find
we
out.
can sell it in the gift shop.
Aw,
Ooh,
those
you know,
little bottles
people
of
would
sand.
buy
People would absolutely buy that.
little bottles like
Yeah,
on a
exactly.
chain.
Michael's poop.
Close to my heart.
That's amazing.
So, with all that being said, what is your favorite part of what you do?
That is a great question. Honestly, my favorite part of what I do is watching guests enjoy my exhibits because obviously so much time and effort goes into taking care of our exhibits on a daily basis, especially our coral exhibits. And so when I actually get to spend time in front of our exhibits and watch guests, specifically young children, you know, connect with coral, connect with the animals that I care about, such as Fish Michael, and get excited about the things that I myself am so excited about. It makes all of that hard work very worth it. So
That's incredible. That's awesome. Okay, let's get into what is a coral? What is it?
yeah.
What is
Tell
it?
us, please. What is it?
Yeah, so as you stated
wondering.
before, it is an animal. A lot of people don't know that or have heard that and can't really connect with that when they're looking at it in an exhibit. So that's one of the main things we try and hammer home in our signage and in our exhibits is that these are live animals that have needs just like you and I do. And so they are actually quite complex organisms, even though if you're just looking at them, they might just look like a pretty rock that's just sitting there. So they are animals. Some of their closest relatives are things like sea jellies and sea anemones. And so they're kind of related to those animals. They have a symbiont that lives within their tissues called zooxanthellae. Really fun word to impress your friends with. Zooxanthellae.
Everybody say it.
Zooxanthellae.
Wow, that was
Beautiful.
satisfying.
And so that is what gives them their pretty colors. It's a unicellular organism that lives within their tissues that does photosynthesis. So animals don't do photosynthesis. They do cellular respiration like you and I do. But things like plants do photosynthesis, obviously, meaning they get their energy from the sun, turn that energy into nutrients that they use to power their cells. So the coral and the zooxanthellae live in harmony together and are able to survive in a part of the ocean that is relatively nutrient poor. So the zooxanthellae is what allows the coral to be happy
Got it.
in the ocean.
So if I was a coral, this is like if I had a little plant living in me that photosynthesized and then
Yes.
made energy for me.
Right.
That's cool.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. So you wouldn't really have to eat at all
Oh my gosh.
because that would they
Sounds
would
terrible.
I need some
Pretty-
zooxanthellae. So I have a question. Are corals like a colony of animals, or are they one individual organism, or is it sort of like how cells make up our body to make one animal? Like what
Yeah.
kind of is the deal?
What
with
are we
corals?
looking at?
Yeah, what are we looking at here?
So when you're looking at, your classic coral, kind of a big, maybe a few feet across, attached to a rock, that is actually a colony of individual polyps, is
Okay.
what the individual unit is called, a coral polyp. And the polyp is the unit of the organism, and then each polyp is a clone of itself. So it's a colony of clones that all kind of live together. And in the DNA of each specific species of coral dictates how it is shaped, how it is formed, how it grows, things like that. So yeah, if you zoom in and look really close at the skin or the skeleton of a coral, it looks like a bunch of tiny little sea anemones in a row. And so that's what the little polyps look like. They're like little sea anemones with tentacles sticking out of the skeleton. They have a little mouth that they can, eat occasionally, some food filtering by. And so it's a bunch of small little animals living together.
What? Like
Cute.
jellies are nidarians? What are corals?
Cnidarians as well.
They're also nidarians?
Yep.
That's pretty cool. I did not know that. Huh. How do they build their skeleton? I just have so many questions about corals.
Yeah, so their skeletons are made of calcium carbonate. And so they basically are just constantly producing that when a new polyp is budding off to kind of continue growing a branch or spreading across a rock. They are just kind of building that skeleton as they go, and it kind of just becomes part of their organism.
And that's the same as snail shells, right?
Yes, I think
That's also
it's
calcium
yeah.
carbonate?
So our spider crabs, we supplement their food
shells.
with calcium so they can build their shells. Same thing with our corals. We supplement calcium so that they can build those shells as well. And so that's why they're very sensitive to ocean acidification, buzzword, because the calcium skeletons are easily dissolved by acidity. So they're very sensitive.
I'm very sensitive too. I get it.
Is there coral in almost every ocean or every region of the world? What about deep sea coral
About
where there's
cold
not?
coral?
Yeah. Can
Yeah.
you tell us a little bit about?
Yeah, so not all corals are photosynthetic. There are some that don't do photosynthesis. They just are filter feeders like a sea anemone or a sea jelly would be. So yeah, we have corals here right off our coast. There's some on the Channel Islands. We actually have one of our new exhibits in the Southern California Gallery highlight some of those. They're called hydrocorals. And they look kind of like a sea fan, but they're kind of hard because they have that skeleton. So yeah, corals are very fascinating taxa because they are so diverse, pretty much found worldwide, occupy so many different niches. Wow, I haven't said that word out loud in such a long time. That sounded
I
so
always
weird coming out of
question
my mouth.
that. Yeah.
Niche.
Nice
One of those.
niche.
The golden niche.
Don't tell us. Do not tell us.
No
the
one
right
tell
word.
us how to pronounce it.
Yeah, I want to go to my grave without knowing
Yeah,
right or
yeah.
wrong.
I want to
That's
say it
right.
differently every time I say it.
There we go. Yeah.
That's the truth.
Niche.
Make it French.
Niche.
Oh, a couple of niches. So you talked a little bit about like feeding our corals and supplementing them with calcium. What are you feeding corals?
Yeah, so we are constantly feeding them plankton. We get frozen plankton, a lot of different kinds of copepods. You can actually, buy at your local fish store. They're pretty easy to mass produce and freeze and ship out. So we have constant supply of those that we just kind of disperse into our coral exhibits. They get most of their energy from the photosynthesis that the zooxanthellae do, but they are getting some nutrients from catching things in the water column.
So it's those little polyps just grab onto the
Right.
copepods.
And it's actually interesting because the more that you feed them on a regular basis, the corals will learn that they should be reaching out those polyps more. So you
Do
can
they
actually,
get longer polyps?
yeah, you can train them
Wow.
to have longer
How to
polyps.
train your coral.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
You can really tell that more with like euphyllias, right? And
Right.
mhm,
Exactly.
because
yeah.
they have the tentacles reaching out, so you can kind of
Right.
see them actually reaching for it.
Yeah, and so we try to feed our exhibits a lot because the corals look more striking if they
Oh.
have their
It makes them
tentacles.
beautiful.
Exactly. Yes.
Food makes me beautiful too. So, get it.
Oh, it does the opposite for me. What would you say the poster child is for corals?
Ooh, the poster child. That's a great question.
Brain coral.
I have always thought of
Yeah.
the like thin branching corals as kind of the
Gorgonians,
poster
or-
child. I was thinking, or the genus is Acropora.
Oh,
Is
acros.
kind of the acros if you're familiar with the
The
hobby.
coral emoji.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great
For
job.
the non-animal person in the room. Thank you.
Yeah.
Social media weighing in
Yeah.
the coral emoji.
Is there an emoji that looks like it? Otherwise, I don't know.
You like show me on the phone which one. So yeah, they are attached to the rock, and then they form these like nice thin branches that all just kind of uniformly grow upwards, which I think are really cool. So a lot of times, if you have seen coral skeletons on someone's shelf at home or in a museum, that's kind of your typical colony.
Why are corals important?
Yeah, so they are. I like to compare coral reefs to like the Amazon rainforest. So coral reefs are basically a hotspot for biodiversity in the ocean. I think I read recently the statistic is like coral reefs make up less than 1% of the ocean floor, but they are home to like 25% of all marine species, so fish and invertebrates. So there are so many different species that call coral reefs home. And just like the Amazon rainforest wouldn't exist without the trees being there, creating that structure, coral reefs would not exist without the corals there, because they are the things that create the structure, the habitat, all the different space for animals to live, nutrients for other animals to eat, different things like that. So
Do they make a waste product? How do they excrete their waste like after they've eaten?
yeah, so because of the way that the zooxanthellae is the symbiont in their tissues, to do photosynthesis, just like a plant takes nutrients from the soil, the zooxanthellae is taking nutrients from the coral animal
Wow.
to do photosynthesis. So that's
So
kind
it's like
of
self-fertilizing
yes,
itself?
the constant cycle of.
Do they sort of help with like eutrophication? Like, do they pull nutrients out of the water?
Not to the same extent that like sponges or clams or mussels or things like that would, but I'm sure there is some element to that.
Sure. Turns out everything's important.
Right? It's crazy.
That is the moral of this
That-
podcast.
Yeah.
everything
We're
is
learning.
important.
Everything is important.
That's pretty crazy.
Especially
tagline.
you.
Yeah.
Yes.
All of you listening are just as important as a sponge or a clam. But that's pretty, I mean, corals really create like a home for all of the animals that,
Right.
and so many of the animals that we have exist in coral reefs, which is why there's coral in all of our habitats. Like,
Yeah.
they are pretty important, and that leads us to a very sad point that maybe corals aren't doing the best right now.
Yes. As we have mentioned, corals are very sensitive, just by the nature of where they live and the role that they play. They are used to very stable conditions. The tropics, are always warm, not a ton of extreme weather, pretty much stable conditions all year round with some minor fluctuations. And so because of that, corals are used to kind of the same conditions the whole time throughout their lives. So if anything gets even just a little bit off balance, they do not like that. And so because of current trends with global warming, warming ocean temperatures, lowering pH of the oceans, a lot of human impacts on reefs across the world, they obviously are in decline because of how sensitive they are. And it's hard to, because of how slowly they grow, it's hard for them to easily bounce back like
Yeah.
some other species are.
Can you explain a little bit about the connection between how global warming impacts ocean acidification for people who might not be familiar?
Yeah, so there is a general increase in the amount of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere because of, human production. And so the ocean as a whole is a big sink for carbon dioxide, meaning a lot of the carbon dioxide in the air gets dissolved into the ocean. And CO2 naturally is an acidic molecule, so dissolving more CO2 into a body of water will cause the pH to drop, meaning it gets a little more acidic. The pH of the ocean is usually around 8.3 to 8.5, and so it can drop below 8, and that obviously is not great for even just a small change like that can affect the corals. Yeah.
Sad.
Sad.
We're just like
Tear
moment
emoji.
of
Yeah.
silence.
So I would love to chat about what the aquarium is doing on site to help corals and then off site to help corals. I know that we have a program right now where we're able to accept confiscated coral from local airports because we're here in LA. Can you talk a little bit about that program?
Yeah. So we, because of where we're situated, we are very close to LAX, which obviously is a major airport. It's one of the first stops from a lot of shipping flights coming from East Asia, the Indo-Pacific, Australia. And so they're
beautiful corals.
Yes, where a lot of beautiful corals are. And so periodically, we will get a call from U.S. Fish and Wildlife saying, hey, we confiscated X number of corals. Do you guys have space to take them? And typically our answer is yes. And so they get these confiscations through different reasons. If someone doesn't have the right permits, if they're trying to smuggle corals in for some reason, different situations like that. We don't really ask too many questions. We just say thank you. And usually they will drive it down here and drop it off for us, which is great. We actually got a confiscation of corals today.
Wow, really?
Yeah.
Are they just in bags?
Yeah. So just in little bags of water. It can really vary the condition that they come in. Sometimes they've been sitting in those bags for a long time. So the water is like very murky. Corals are super unhappy, but typically they arrive in pretty good condition, and we can actually use them in our exhibits,
you guys can
which
have
is
pretty
great.
good success with all of them.
Yeah.
Do
That's
you
awesome.
quarantine them the same way we do with other animals?
Yeah, so all of any new coral that's coming in, even if we're getting it from a different aquarium where we know it has done well, we will keep it behind the scenes, kind of ideally in its own separate area. But sometimes we don't quite have the space for that, but we'll keep a really close eye on it. We'll do a few different treatments just to make sure that it has no external parasites or bacterial infections or anything like that. And we'll make sure that it is happy behind the scenes before we transfer it to an exhibit.
I guess part of the reason I asked is we talked a lot about introduced species and introduced diseases, and so me being a frog person, like I always think about when you import frogs, chytrid is a huge risk for them,
Right.
and there are other diseases. Are there any sort of like typical coral diseases that you are looking out for, like you test for this specific thing?
Yeah,
You can even spot it the second you look at them.
Right. So we actually, because it's something we're always looking for as coral aquarists here, because for our very established coral exhibits, it is very easy for parasites to get introduced into a big coral exhibit. It is very, very difficult to eradicate them.
Yeah.
So we have to be extra, extra careful because it becomes so much work for us if we get some sort of infestation. So some of the big things that we look for are there's small little invertebrates that can live on coral tissue and slowly eat away at it. There's two different things. Yeah, extremely rude. The big one is nudibranchs. They almost look like, you can see them with the naked eye if they're big enough, but they are like fuzzy and white. They look like almost like little sheep.
Is it a specific nudibranch that eats coral?
Yes.
So you don't want-
Yeah, and
It's
it
got, like,
usually
yes.
affects.
A lot of zoas, right? And soft corals.
Well, the one that we get a lot here is Montipora eating nudibranchs, which is a specific species of stony coral, and so they will like hide underneath the coral,
Sneaky.
and then at night will like come out and eat the coral, and they will like lay their eggs underneath. It's a whole thing.
It's a whole thing.
And then one of the other big ones that we get, I could not tell you off the top of my head exactly what kind of animal they are, but we just call them red bugs. They are
really
tiny little red dots, and their main prey is acropora, which is the coral
emoji
emoji,
coral.
the emoji
Yeah.
coral,
Thank you so
yes.
much.
And so we have had issues with those in the past. So those are the two big ones that we look for. And then also just bacterial infection is a big one that can spread easily. And so that's just looking at just the general tissue of the coral. If some of it is like slimy or sloughing off or turning white on one side, that's easier for us to spot.
And those are called hitchhikers, right?
Yes. Hitchhikers that we don't like,
Boo.
unfortunately. We say,
Aptasia.
get
I
off.
don't know if there's.
Does Aptasia ever come in on corals, or is that something more so just live rock?
Yeah, it's more so the live rock, because Aptasia, for those of you that aren't familiar, are small little anemones that are basically like a weed in your garden. They will grow like crazy on any sort of rock inside of an aquarium. And they are very, very hard to get rid of, because if you try to scrape them off or suck them up, they will just say, "Oh my God, I need to spawn," and they'll create like 100 more.
Oh no, I need 100 more of
I
me.
need to repopulate because the world is ending.
Honestly, it's a really good evolutionary
Oh, it's
strategy.
genius.
It's
Yes,
just
but for
really
us, it's very
not
I want to
ideal.
learn that.
yeah.
not ideal for an aquarium.
100 Scots.
Oh my
Scott
gosh.
threatened.
I'd still be so unproductive.
That's so funny. Why are people smuggling corals? Why are people obtaining them illegally and trying to bring them through the airport? What's the
Yeah,
purpose of
so there is a very large industry of hobby aquarists, people that have coral reef tanks at home, which is great. Obviously, that's exciting. We love people connecting with the ocean like that. But it has created a huge market for corals being sold. And so there are, legal markets to sell those corals, but, you always have people trying to skirt things.
Skirt, skirt.
Do you see a lot too, or potentially a lot of people just kind of wanting a souvenir from their trip and just thinking, oh, this will look good on my shelf later?
Yeah. Typically that's in the form of coral skeletons that people take. I would be shocked if someone, was trying to bring home
A
a live coral.
Yeah.
But I'm sure there are people
might,
that are
they might.
adventurous enough to
So
want to
don't do that.
Yeah.
Please don't do that.
Yeah.
Or there
Because
have been
it's-
problems where people go to local fish stores and they try to put corals in with their goldfish.
Right.
And,
Right.
oh, I've heard
Yeah.
some horror stories,
Yeah. Some
happens
people.
then?
Well, because goldfish are freshwater.
Oh,
Corals
got
are
it.
saltwater.
Got it. Don't do that.
Don't.
Yeah, not recommended.
Well, then let's get into Seacor.
Yeah.
Our external conservation effort. What is Seacor?
Yeah, so Seacor is a nonprofit organization that the aquarium supports both financially and with manpower. So Seacor itself stands for, yes, J Power. Seacor stands for Sexual Coral Reproduction. So SE is sexual,
not know that that's
right?
what that stood for.
Did not know that until someone spelled that out for me. It kind of blows people's minds. So SE, sexual, CO, coral, RE, reproduction. So they are focused on rebuilding coral reefs and mainly focusing on how to best have corals reproduce sexually, which we can talk about in a sec. But they are trying to develop specific techniques that are the most efficient way for nurseries in different island nations to create new corals that can then be outplanted onto an affected reef. And so their main focus is coming up with the best techniques that can then be upscaled at a much bigger scale to have the biggest effect possible. So they're not necessarily focused on, trying to solve global warming or trying to solve coral reefs in crisis. They're focusing on how
Putting
best
corals
to
out there.
repopulate.
Is Seacor an organization or a program?
It's an organization. It's its own company. They have staff. They have funding. All this different stuff.
And they primarily do they work to bring experts together to sort of talk about here's the best way we can grow these corals? Like, is your contribution to that partially manpower, but also your expertise from the aquarium?
Yeah. So we will provide input on, obviously our expertise here at the aquarium is keeping corals happy in a contained system. And so that's not something that, a lot of coral researchers have a ton of experience with. So we provide our input with that.
Sure.
But Secor itself, their main focus is partnering with organizations around the world. So they have partner organizations a lot in the Caribbean. I think Bonaire is one of their main sites. I was out in Saipan in the Pacific. So at these different island nations that they go to, they kind of partner with a local organization or a local lab there and help them develop their own practices, kind of using the Secor method in order to make that a more successful project.
That's awesome. I don't think I really knew a lot about it. I would always hear like, oh, this aquarist went to Secor this year, and I didn't really understand what it was.
Yeah.
So do you have experience here in breeding corals? Is that something that you also bring to the table? Is that something that, do they breed them in a contained system? Like, I have a lot of questions.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess taking a step back, the way that corals reproduce, there are kind of two main methods, being asexual reproduction and sexual reproduction. So one of the cool things about coral is that you can like break off a branch, put it somewhere else, and that branch that has broken off will continue to grow, and the parent colony that you broke it off from will also continue to grow. So that is an easy way to take one coral and make a bunch of new corals is just by, yes, fragging.
Wow.
Fragging, short for fragmentation.
Yeah.
So we will actually do that fairly often here at the aquarium. If we have a coral that is doing so well in one exhibit, it's kind of outgrowing its space, we want to populate other smaller exhibits, we can break off small pieces, move them to the other exhibits, they'll continue to grow.
Propagating a plant.
Exactly. Yeah. But the downside of that in a restoration sense is that all of those fragments that you have created are still genetically exactly the same as the parent colony. So it is a good method if you were just trying to create more coral cover to create habitat for more animals, but from a ecosystem sense, it's not great
You want
because you want, diverse genetics.
So theoretically, though, could it just grow indefinitely?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Corals are wild.
They are one.
Do we know, is there like an oldest coral that we know of?
I'm sure there is some coral somewhere that is the oldest coral that people have
Grandpa
tested,
coral.
but they can live like thousands of years.
So
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah, they have carbon dated a lot. But
That's how they
what was I
reproduce.
saying? Yes, so they can reproduce asexually, and then they also do sexual reproduction, which is where colonies will release gametes into the water, sperm and eggs get released into the water, and they will mix together and form new corals that will then settle and create genetically distinct corals.
Like, one little guy will settle and he'll start like cloning himself over and over again
Yeah, one
until
little
he
guy.
just
Little guy.
Yeah.
It's so cute to imagine just like the one polyp, like, here's good, like
Yeah.
just starting the
No,
whole
it's-
He
thing.
turns
Just
into
the word
Grandpa
very
Coral.
cute.
too.
He's so cute. I
Yeah.
love him.
Him.
He's just made like a whole city, just by himself.
Yeah,
Good
it's
guy.
crazy to think about.
That's awesome.
So selfless.
He's a good guy. He's a really good guy. I love that. So they prioritize sexual reproduction for coral specifically because it increases the diversity.
Right.
Is any part of the project increasing resilience to ocean acidification or temperature changes or anything like that?
So kind of indirectly, because they are collecting gametes from corals, typically on a reef that is already kind of at risk or declining. The corals that are still there are the
probably
ones
hardy.
that are the hardiest,
Sure.
because they have been able to survive whatever conditions have been coming in. And so by reproducing those corals, we know that they are more resilient to whatever changes might be happening at the current time at a given location.
Now, are we bringing back any of the fragmented corals or not the fragmented, but the corals you're producing with Secor in different countries? Are we bringing them back here?
We have in the past. We have not in a few years because, I mean, it's mainly just for educational purposes for us. You know, it's not easy for us to then ship it back to them after
Yeah,
a
of
certain
course.
point and they can outplant it. So it is something we have done in the past, but we have not done that recently.
What was your overall experience like going to Saipan and participating in this project? How long were you there, and sort of what was it like?
Day to day.
Yeah. So I was there for 2 weeks.
That was a long time.
Beginning of July. I flew out July 4th.
Aw,
And
America's birthday.
yeah, it was interesting because I flew across the international date line, so I like skipped a full day, so I kind of missed most of July 4th. Yeah, don't tell America.
Don't tell America I missed his
Ooh.
birthday.
Ooh. But yeah, so Saipan itself, if people aren't familiar, is actually American soil. It's a small little island right next to Guam. It's part of the Northern Marianas Islands, so it's very close to the Marianas Trench. It's like a 3-hour flight from Eastern Asia. So it's culturally a very interesting place because it is American soil, so signs are in English. You know, most people speak English there. There is an American presence, but historically, you know, obviously there's a native population that has lived there. It at one point was Japanese territory. It was German at one point. It was Spanish way back when. And so it's kind of this interesting hodgepodge of cultures that make it kind of a very distinct place. It's very interesting.
There's
And then
lots of good food.
so much good food because of that. You know, all those different cultures have contributed. But it was also a very important site in World War, I believe it was World War II. And so because of that, there's a lot of memorials and war relics. There's like tanks that are just out in the lagoon that have rusted because no one has cleaned that up. And
Clean up your tank.
Yeah. So it's got a fascinating history, but it's a very cool little place. It's a small island. It's like 12 miles long and 5 miles wide, so not super big. But we were partnering with Secor was partnering with a local organization there called JAMS.
I love that.
Johnston Applied Marine Science.
James.
And it's led by a scientist, Liza Johnston, who is from the U.S. She's from Florida, and she has since moved out to Saipan and started this organization to focus on coral reef restoration, which is super cool.
That's awesome.
And so Secor got a grant with her to partner and kind of develop her techniques out there. And so we were working with her. And so my role there was basically just manpower. I was a dive buddy whenever they needed to go out to do something, if that was looking at the coral nursery, scrubbing tiles, making sure things were hunky-dory out there, and then also helping with the spawning dives, where we go out at night after the full moon and collect the gametes
Is it
from
connected to the full moon?
Yeah,
Yes.
they spawn with the moon?
Yes. So
Why?
corals, because
Werewolves.
of
Werewolf
so the way that corals will spawn is the different species will all spawn at the same time.
Whoa.
So like all individuals in theory of one species will spawn at once,
Okay.
and then a little bit later a different species will go
Wow.
off. And so these researchers that live there year round know the reefs, know the corals. They knew pretty much exactly how many days after the full moon
Wow.
they were going to spawn and like how many minutes after sunset they spawn.
So specific.
Yeah, and so
Amazing.
she had a schedule and she's like, okay, we need to be out there by 7:15 because by 7:30 they're going to be going off, and then at
Wow.
7:45 the other species
That's
is going to go off. Yeah.
amazing.
And so it's
So you have to. They are
crazy.
Secor plans these trips around
Exactly.
the moon cycle, maybe.
Right, which
That's
is
really
why
cool.
I happened to be on July 4th
Yeah.
because the full moon I think was on July
Yeah,
5th.
That's when the moon is.
Right.
So
You can't
wow.
change that.
I think it's really cool to, when you think about these projects, how important local ecological knowledge is.
Yeah.
And sometimes even like traditional ecological knowledge is so important to just understand what's happening in the environment. And you can't know those specific things unless you've been there observing it.
Right, exactly.
And it's crazy to me that someone's like, hey, it's 7:47. There's going to be a huge spawn. So we
Literally,
gotta get out
I
of
know.
here. Like,
That's so cool.
And it was interesting too because there were local dive groups not associated with us at all that were also coming out at certain times at night because they just wanted to watch the coral spawn just from like a tourism spectating perspective. So there's a very big like local cultural connection to the reefs, which is really cool. Yeah.
What does it look like?
Yeah, so they have shown it a bunch on Planet Earth a few times, but it's
Turns out I gotta watch Planet
yeah,
Earth.
it's very good. The dramatic music too.
Yeah, I'm sure it makes your heart like swell.
Yeah,
Like, whoa,
well,
it's happening.
it was very cool actually seeing it
Yeah,
in
I bet.
person. But if you can imagine all of the little polyps on a coral head, each one of those polyps is going to produce a gamete bundle. So they will kind of package sperm and eggs in one little bundle, and then it will just kind of pop out of the polyp. But all of the polyps will release it at the exact same time. And so it's kind of depends on the species, but it's kind of like the size of like the head of a pencil or a
Wow.
pen head. So it is visible.
Yeah.
They're small little specks, but you know when it's happening, and they float, so they all just kind of get released at the same time.
Oh. Do they like meet at the surface and then sink and settle?
So they float up to the surface, and then the wave action is what causes them to kind of break apart the bundles, and then everything kind of mixes together from different colonies. And then that's fertilization happening.
Yeah.
So as soon as that happens, they start growing. And then after, 24, 48 hours, they'll start to sink down and find a good spot to settle.
Oh, those little guys.
So
That's
cool.
really
Yeah.
cute.
So cool. What about here at the aquarium? Have you do our coral spawn?
So we have corals that will spawn here. It is not purposeful on our part. We're not trying to make
Is
them
it
spawn.
with the moon here? How do they know?
We have different light cycles, so I think some of them are keyed in on that. I think sometimes it's just been a while, and so they just kind of need to release
guess
it,
it's
we will come in and there will be, eggs at the surface, or sometimes we will even see some, like right as the lights are turning on first thing in the morning, we can still see coral spawning. But we have never tried to, at least in recent years since I've been here, we have never tried to like get those gametes and try and settle, just because it's such a work-intensive process.
Delicate too, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing so much
Yeah.
about what Secor was like. That's cool. I didn't know very much about what the project was, and it's really cool to see the aquarium having an impact sort of globally also. And,
Yeah, definitely.
knowing that you went out to Saipan and you helped sort of spawn these corals and like work on restoration work is
So cool.
pretty awesome. Our last couple questions are our social media questions that we did touch on why corals are important. But one of the people actually asked, how successful has coral restoration been so far?
That's a great question that I don't have, obvious hardcore statistics on, but I think there are more and more organizations popping up working on coral restoration, and a lot of it is usually pretty site specific. A lot of local governments are creating organizations that will focus on restoration in a specific area, or creating funding for organizations to be successful. And so it definitely has helped, it's obviously not hurting. And especially just from like a cultural impact in those specific communities on small islands, creating that connection with the local community and the coral reefs is super important. So even just that is a big
Just
win.
educating people
Right,
about
exactly.
And what the problems are, I
Right,
think that helps
right.
too. Speaking of, another social media question is, how can I help with coral restoration? Not me specifically.
How
Aaron
can-
help.
yeah,
How
Aaron,
can
yeah.
Aaron help?
Go
Aaron's
get in
pretty
my
useless
exhibit.
as it relates to coral. But how can this person help? And what can they do besides just kind of learning about it, spreading the word, and donating to the cause? Like, is there anything sort of focused that an individual can do to help?
Yeah, unfortunately, it's kind of the same answer that I'm sure they've heard before, because global warming is the main factor for coral reef degradation, you know, reducing your carbon footprint, carpooling to work, riding your bicycle.
Ooh, I have one.
Yeah.
Coral safe sunscreen. That's a thing,
yes.
right?
Yes, that is a thing. That's a good one.
What is in sunscreen that's killing coral?
I think it's oxybenzone.
Okay,
I should have
so-
said that with more confidence because it would have sounded right.
But that is a component of some sunscreens, and so if you
Right.
are going out in an area where there are corals and that's in your sunscreen, that gets in the water and that can kill corals. So
Yes.
if you look for reef-safe sunscreen,
Yes.
that should not include the ingredients that are harmful. So
Right.
that is what you can do.
Yes. And another big one, too, is just supporting politicians and legislation that are focused on environmental issues and pushing forward, you know, legislation that is focused on reducing emissions,
Yeah.
XYZ, all of that.
Could corals be used for medical purposes? Have corals been used in any sort of medical research? Like I know.
I mean, I don't know of any hard and fast specifics, but I would imagine there has to be some research being done on the way that they can be fragmented
Yeah.
and continue to grow, especially because of their, you know, calcium-based skeleton. Obviously, we also have a calcium-based skeleton.
What?
We're
Right.
the same.
Yeah,
I am a coral.
that would be
Fragment
cool if we
my
could,
arm.
right? You know, like break a bone and then two more
and then
appear.
grow
you
it
know.
on the second arm out
Right.
of my arm.
Yeah,
Yeah, that'd be great.
we should
I could
start
type
that.
so fast.
If every time you broke your bone, you grew another of whatever broke, it would be questionable. You'd have
And
like-
then a
Just
fish
start.
ate your broken bone and turned it into sand.
Whoa.
and that's Hawaii.
Full circle.
Come on,
Origin story.
we're back.
Okay, last question. Is there hope for corals on our planet?
I think so. Like I said, you know, watching people interact with my exhibits, you know, seeing those corals, seeing how beautiful they are. People obviously want to help corals. They're so beautiful. And, you know, once you start learning more about corals and coral reefs, you realize how important they are for the ocean. And just, you know, getting more people on board with we have to prioritize these things in order to kind of save these really delicate communities. I think there is hope there.
Yeah, you really, if you visit the aquarium, you know, you really get to see the full picture. You're seeing,
Right.
you know, up close these animals, these creatures that are keeping our oceans healthy and safe for other animals. I'm losing my train of thought as I'm going here. But I think all of the animals here at the aquarium are great ambassadors
Oh,
for
for
their
sure.
species in the ocean.
For sure.
So
And I think especially here in Southern California, you know, a lot of us that have grown up here, you don't really ever get to see a coral reef in person unless you're like going to Hawaii for a family
Yeah.
vacation. So having kids being able to actually see them in person in an exhibit and identify, hey, that's a coral.
Yeah.
Hey, I should care about this. This is cool.
And
So
they're
valuable.
so beautiful. Like
Right.
that's the thing.
That
People,
helps.
yeah, they're strikingly beautiful and
it
they're
would suck if they were
colorful.
hideous.
Right, yeah.
I
You're like, care about that.
Genuinely, I think that sometimes is a factor in whether or not
yeah.
people
That
care
might be
about
their
the
evolution,
species.
There's
right?
so many
Is it-
kinds too. You look at one, you're like, wait,
Yeah.
is that also a coral?
Right.
They're
yeah,
so
yeah.
beautiful.
Like what is it? The sun corals, little spirally ones.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
those are crazy.
Squiggles.
Yeah, are they a type of gorgonian? What are they?
Yeah, they're closely related to gorgonians.
Ah, okay.
They look like pipe cleaners.
So
Basically.
We have
they
those
are
in-
filter feeders and photosynthetic, correct?
They are non-photosynthetic.
Non-photosynthetic.
Yes.
Okay.
At least the ones that I'm thinking of. I don't know if you're
Okay.
speaking of it.
We have
But
those in tropical right now, right?
Deep reef.
Deep
Yes.
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, they're really
They're
cool.
very cool. They
They're
look like
awesome.
something out of Dr. Seuss.
They really do.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
Yeah,
I
they're
love
very
visiting
cool.
up there. Cool. Thank you, Jay, so much for talking to us today.
course.
This- I learned so much. And every time someone talks to me about corals, I'm just like, oh, whoa, okay,
Yeah.
yeah. I
Well,
get
good.
it.
I'm
No, I
glad.
don't. But I'm going to listen to this
You
podcast
get
a
it
thousand
more
times.
than you
I get
did
it more
before.
than I did.
I
before.
understand slightly more, and now I just think of them as just one little guy who's doing his
Yeah,
best.
a little crazy
I
guy.
just love that they're
doing
all the
his
same
thing.
little guy, and they made a city.
They work
It's
so
really
hard.
cute.
Yeah.
And
And
they
they're-
do so much.
They're doing it. We got to protect them. So everyone, stop using non-reef safe sunscreen.
That's what you can
And
do.
do what you can to help out the ocean because it is important. But thanks, Jay. It's been awesome.
Of course.
I know everything about corals now.
You're an expert.
Save our ocean.
Yeah.
That's the hashtag at the end of every podcast episode. Save the ocean.
Aquarium of the Podcific is brought to you by Aquarium of the Pacific, a 501c3 nonprofit organization. In 2023, the aquarium celebrates 25 years of connecting millions of people worldwide to the beauty and wonder of our ocean planet. Head to aquariumofpacific.org to learn more about our 25th anniversary celebration. Keep up with the aquarium on social media at Aquarium Pacific on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn.
This podcast is produced by Aaron Lundy, Madeline Walden, and Scott Shaw. Our music is by Andrew Reitzma, and our podcast art is by Brandy Kenny. Special thanks to Cecile Fisher, Anitza Valles, and our audiovisual and education departments, and to all of our amazing podcast guests for taking time out of their day to talk about the important work that they do. Podcific wouldn't be possible without the support of the aquarium's donors, members, guests, and supporters. Thanks for listening.